Good gardening, people. We're running a few minutes late today. My apologies, but sometimes life is busy. Today we're going to be talking about sprayers and what to spray on your garden. It is now full-blown pest season, and you've got everything. You've got fungus, you've got bugs, and you've got weeds out the yin-yang. Well, there's a couple of ways you can deal with that. The organic method, which is a lot of labor, and sometimes when it's in the 90s, that's very difficult to manage just from the stress and work point of view. And they're only partially effective, but some of them are good. And I will tell you which ones I recommend and which ones it's up to you. We're also going to be discussing what chemicals are best to use in my recommendation for the various purposes. I am short one chemical that I really wanted to present to you, which is called wilt proof. It's a surfactant, and I ordered it, and thanks to the wonders of technology, my order is completely lost. Not going to be here on time. So when time comes for me to show you how to mix, I'm just going to have to pretend that I'm adding it to the product. C'est la vie. At any rate, I'm going to have a little presentation for you about these topics, and after that I will follow up on showing you how to mix a chemical and what chemicals can go with each other and where they should best be used in the garden and when. There is a time of day that you need to know is the best time to spray, and cautionary tales about when not to spray. So without further ado, we are going to show you a little show all about how to spray bugs and weeds. How to apply insecticides and herbicides safely to your garden. That actually does sound like a somewhat complicated process. So we're going to narrow it down to the best chemicals to use and the best ways. What started as a tiny weed here and there, as it turns out, is a weed that is now growing slowly, not noticeably necessarily, but it grows and grows. Suddenly there are more weeds everywhere, little tiny ones at first, but it's amazing how quickly they grow, almost like a cartoon, as a matter of fact. Till your plants are in terrible peril. Suddenly the weeds are thick with deep roots, sometimes with thorns, and insects show up to take over your garden.
111 years old. I should have preserved him.
There are shameless merchandisers out there who sell you worthless products. I could name a few, but I've already named them a number of times. These can kill the plants. They can damage the plants. They certainly can damage soil and streams. They can leave salt residues behind, even the ones that are supposedly good for plants are not because of the salts they leave. So what is a conscientious gardener to do? How do I save my garden, keep the friendly bugs and plants, and yet remove the weeds, pests, insects? It's a big problem. Can going organic work? Well, some of it can. Or must I use dangerous chemicals? Well, some are dangerous and others not as much. Both and neither is the answer. Organic methods are weak but safer. Chemical methods can be dangerous if one chooses the wrong chemical. So we seek to find the happy middle ground between the two factions. We want it to be safe, yet effective. Else why use it? No protection for your plants is like you going off into outer space and being nude on the moon. You need some kind of protection against the hordes of pests that will be attacking you. The organic methods include friendly insects, some of whom volunteer themselves, which is nice, or they can be purchased from some nurseries or online. There are non-toxic and partially effective methods, but again, stress the partially effective. But of course, the main organic methods are weeding with a hoe or with your hand, or hand picking the insects off of the plants, which doesn't get the young at all because they're laying eggs left and right. These methods may work, but poorly and with much labor. A good organic method is putting paper and straw in the garden. It can block up to 90% of the weeds. If you haven't done that, I suggest it because you will sure appreciate it come July. Or you can spray marigold, tobacco, and peppers mixed into a tea, discourage insects. And when I discourage, I mean it doesn't kill them. It just makes them want to go someplace else. Teas need constant reapplication and don't work on all bugs. Some bugs, they'll come after the plant with those on there and ignore it. The summer heat and constant attention that you put out there can make all of the organic methods fall off when you need them most. You need a better method. But are chemicals safe? That's what everybody's worried about. Food contamination, environmental contamination. Some chemicals are not safe, either to you or to the environment. It's a good idea to learn which ones to avoid as well as which ones to use, while others are safe to you and to the environment, especially if used properly. Again, a surfactant really helps with most pesticides. You need to learn what a surfactant is. It is a very important part of gardening that nobody uses hardly. And what a surfactant is kind of a sticking agent. It's a glue that sticks a chemical to the plant so that it doesn't wash off, and it stays there until such time as the plant rots away. And when that happens, the chemical breaks down so it doesn't even hurt the earthworms. A surfactant is a great environmental aid and usage aid. It improves performance. The best one out there is called wilt proof. There are others, but this one's the best. It's made from the sap of pine trees, which you've ever touched. Can be very sticky. It protects friendly insects, improves chemical performance and the longevity while working against the target insect safely. We talked before about important chemicals in another show. And here is a quick review of the ones that need to be on hand. 7 is safe for you because it washes off and it doesn't enter the food, but it kills both friendly and unfriendly insects and is bad for the environment. But if you add wilt proof to it, that minimizes that damage, so you get some of the best of both. Imidacloprid kills bad insects and spares the good ones, but it leaves toxins in your food. So it's best only used with ornamentals like flowers and other things you don't plan to eat. Spinosad is safe for you or for friendly insects, but is very slow to work. Whereas permethrin is the one I recommend. It's safe and non-toxic to all warm-blooded animals, and if used with wilt proof, is safe to friendly insects and a good control for the bad ones. It's a synthetic based on the chrysanthemum. Weeding with chemicals is a bit more complex than killing insects, unfortunately. Selective chemicals, those that kill only either a grass or a broadleaf plant, can either can do so sparing the other, but non-selective herbicides kill both. There is no chemical out there, however, that can recognize a flower or a vegetable from a weed. You can't just helter-skelter spray everything. You have to learn to spot spray. So you're kind of stuck with organic methods of weeding control in the vegetable and flower garden because side spray can definitely damage your friendlies. And we get to what sprayer we need to be using under these circumstances. Unless you dedicate a single sprayer to a single chemical, you have to clean them after each use or risk contamination of the next spray, which is used, and the last one that's still a residue. Soap and water and a good rinse are highly recommended after each use. I recommend a 2-gallon sprayer. It is inexpensive and it works well. I've had the same one now for 6 years and it's still going strong. I also like simple spray bottles. You can dedicate each to a single chemical and never risk contamination during the next use. I also label each of those bottles so that I remember what they are. This type of sprayer is not very helpful outdoors. Doesn't hold enough, and you have to pump like get crazy constantly. So I recommend it only for indoor use for plants if you don't have a lot of plants. And I also don't recommend the hose-in sprayers. The first third of the tank, the chemical inside is too hot. It can burn or cause unexpected damage. The second third is about right. And the last third is too weak to do good work. So I call it the Goldilocks effect. When spraying herbicide near friendly plants, beware of wind drift. This can cause damage to friendly plants. You need to shield them with cardboard. Also, the best time to spray is early morning. Beware of the heat. It can increase the potency of the chemical and cause selective pesticides to turn into non-selective. Also, don't ever spray chemicals directly into flowers. You will kill the bees. The flower is not the main thing you need to be protecting anyway. It's all the foliage that gets most of the damage, and it's the life support to the plant. Be aware that if you're walking through a chemical that you just sprayed, you may damage any friendly plants you step on. So I tend to spot spray and walk backwards. And if I'm spraying a big field, I start at the far end and walk backwards through it, spraying back toward the entryway so that I never step in that chemical. So that concludes the presentation on spraying for bugs and weeds safely. I will be showing you some examples of that next here at my desk, how to actually mix the chemicals and the different kinds of sprayers I recommend, as well as some of the chemicals that were mentioned in this presentation. So we're back from that highly entertaining film. I'm sure that it just left you riveted, but regardless, it was informative and important information that you will be really glad you learned in the middle of July. For those of you who haven't put down hay at the beginning of the year in your garden, now you're going to regret that. It holds in extra moisture, it blocks weeds, and cuts down the amount of labor that you're going to spend out in that garden, exponentially speaking. So I've got some products here around, as you can see around me. I've got different kinds of spray bottles, 2-gallon sprayer, some chemicals, even some organic methods to use. All of these are certainly things I would recommend, even the organic ones. I don't recommend the organics if you're having a mass infestation. That's a way of kind of discouraging insects, not eliminating them. You can try, but you're going to have to be one vigorous person when the temperature is around 100 degrees outside in order to keep up with those bugs. They don't mind the heat, and the weeds love it. You see here before you 2 of the 3 products I highly recommend if you're going to go straight organic gardening. It doesn't hurt to use these even if you are using other chemicals. After all, organic gardening is kind of like carbon-free emissions. It taxes nothing to use it. It is certainly not dangerous to you in any way. The product on the left you see is tobacco that I grew last year for this purpose. Product on the right are hot peppers. I have tons of those. The third product I recommend is either leaves and flowers from the marigold plant or from the chrysanthemum plant. I don't happen to have any of those handy for this demonstration, but you know what those flowers look like. So you take the dried of the three, mix them at a 1:1:1 ratio, equal amounts. You put them into a pot and put it on the stove with water and boil it for about an hour. Then you strain it very seriously because you don't want any little flecks getting inside of your sprayer to clog up the entryway. That tends to really mess up a sprayer. So you want to make sure that that tea is completely clean before you use it. I like to add an ounce of wilt proof to it as well. 1 ounce to a gallon of the mixture. That can be stored in a container until it's needed, but you're going to run through it fast if you're using it as your main defense. You have to go out, I would say, no less often than once a week and spray it, because it doesn't kill insects. It just encourages them not to eat. And in the normal course of dewfall or rain, that chemical begins to weaken. The wilt proof will help with that a great deal by increasing the longevity and the potency of it on the plant. So that would be the best organic method, other than, I would say, make sure you're using straw to cut down on the weeds. Here before you, you see a couple of herbicides that are quite frequently used. The one on the left is called Complete, and what it does is it kills every kind of plant out there. It kills grasses, it kills broadleaf plants, it kills trees, it kills shrubs. It's one you don't want to use very usefully or freely. Let me tell you a story about that. I was working in my youth back in Colorado doing lawn care. Went up to a place, had a big expansive estate, lots of trees, lots of grass. It was a hot August day. So I went around with the sprayer and sprayed all of the weeds in the property. But there was also a wind that day. Well, as it turns out, about 3 weeks later, half of the trees on that property died. What I didn't know at the time was when you get out in the heat, it exponentially increases the potency of the toxin. Also, if there's a wind, it can carry that toxin to nearby plants, and even small amounts of it can do great damage, especially a product which is non-selective like Complete. You can also have this problem with selective herbicides if you're in that kind of a heat. It does a crossover. It becomes toxic to all plants when it's supposed to only be toxic to a target plant. Now, on the right, we have a product called Grass Getter. It is a selective instead of a non-selective. And what it does is it will kill any kind of a grass without harming a broadleafed plant. So it is possible in flower gardens, if you have a problem with Johnson grass or Bermuda or crabgrass or anything that's in the grass family that's choking out your flowers, you could get out there and hand weed, which I recommend, or you could go out there with Grass Scatter and as carefully as possible spot spray those grassy plants. Be warned, even if it's a selective, it can cross over, especially in greater heat. You don't want to spray any kind of herbicide on a friendly plant, if at all possible. But if you're real careful and you use shields like cardboard between the plant and what you're spraying, you can get away with getting in there and spraying some of those grass weeds. And some of them you just about have to in a flower garden. Johnson grass and some of the others send down roots incredibly deep that you can never pull up organically. So spraying them seems to be the only way of getting rid of them. or else getting out there every couple of days and pulling the same weed up over and over again, which of course is folly. The other problem you're going to run into this time of year, especially in June, but also into July quite frequently, is the problem with garden funguses. They attack members of the tobacco family very readily, but they can attack your roses. They can attack just about any fleshy plant. I tend to find the shrubberies that are bigger than roses less susceptible, and some roses get it worse than others. But the thing to keep in mind there is don't let your plants be wet at night. Don't water later than, say, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon if you can possibly help it. You need that sunshine to dry all of the water off of the plants by nightfall, which is when fungus gets busy and starts feeding. So if it doesn't have wet conditions on the leaves, it greatly inhibits its ability to spread on the plant. But if you got a fungus, there's several things you have to do. You have to trim off all the yellowing leaves. You have to trim off the next set of green leaves that are touching those yellowing leaves, and you have to spray a garden fungicide. One mixed with wilt-proof is highly recommended. But fungus is quickly mutating, just like viruses are. So after about 2 weeks of use, if you're still having a fungus, you have to switch to a second fungicide. And this stuff is pricey, and it doesn't work entirely well. But if you have a valuable plant like a rose plant or something, you got to do everything to keep it healthy. So there are times where even I use fungicides, although for the most part, I just hope that the summer dries up and the fungus stops sometime in August. And on to the insects. Here I have displayed, again, imidacloprid, which I recommend only for your ornamental plants. The best way of using this product, the one on the left, the complete insect killer, is to do it as a drench rather than spraying the plant. You can spray the plant as well, and that'll help protect it. But the best way of using this product is to put an ounce of this in a gallon of water. You don't need wilt-proof for this or another surfactant, and just pour it over the plant. The rose plant typically is what I use it on. Unless, of course, it's a tree and you want to use that, then you need more than 1 gallon. You'll need several gallons of it. But what it does is it goes into the root system. It's sucked up into all the leaves and the branches of the plant, and thereafter, for about 6 months, any insect trying to eat that plant is going to die. It doesn't affect bees because it doesn't travel to flowers. So it's a really good product for what it does. Imidacloprid is a great way of low spraying necessity later in the season. You're using a minimal of chemicals because it's only going onto one plant, and it lasts months and months and months. So I highly recommend imidacloprid. The problem is it also permeates the tissues of the plants, so you can't use it on food. For that, you want to avoid anything that's systemic and stick with things that are topical. And if you recall, topical means it stays on the surface of the plant, but it doesn't go into the flesh of the plant or its fruit. That's what permethrin is, the product on the right. Always buy concentrates, never get ready to use products. Permethrin is a copy chemical of the one that is produced naturally by chrysanthemums. It's a very effective toxin against insects, unless they're really tough. There's a few of them it won't kill, but it'll sure slow them down and discourage them. But most of them it'll kill. And you don't drench it like you would complete. You use an ounce of permethrin along with an ounce of wilt-proof to a gallon of water and spray it on the tops of the plants. Do not spray it into the flowers. Then you contaminate the pollen inside the flower. That pollen is clean It doesn't have any toxin in it, even if you used a systemic, but the flower will become poisonous if you spray any kind of insecticide inside of it. We don't want to kill the bees. The bees are good. They keep the garden going and keep humanity alive. Enough of them are dying off from changes in the environment as it is. So permethrin is what I recommend. I would recommend spraying the plants about once every 2 weeks with it. It's the same chemical that's in dog collars and dog soaps and a lot of repellents we spray on ourselves, because it does not kill any kind of warm-blooded animal. It only affects cold-blooded animals. So for the most part, it's totally safe around fruit. Does not enter into the fruit. It stays on the surface, and it's non-toxic even if you accidentally ate some of it. The bad thing of it is it will travel and go into the groundwater, and that can damage fish or streams. So that's why we use the wilt proof. It keeps it in place on the plant. It doesn't travel down into the ground. It doesn't affect the environment. As the plant rots away in your garden, the chemical breaks down. So it's no longer going to cause the problems it would as if it was fresh and managed to wash off. Wilt proof again comes to the rescue of the environment. It also improves the potency of the chemical by 40% and doubles the length of time between having to spray. So it saves you the cost of the chemical, it saves on the environment, and it improves the potency. Permethrin is probably my favorite garden chemical because of that. I also use it to spray for ticks out in the high grass in my field. It does a good job. However, since they're not ingesting any of the plant, you have to spray it directly on the tick for it to work. So you still have to spray the field fairly often, even if you're using wilt proof. Here we have a sampling of my sprayers. On the left, you see the 2-gallon sprayer. I think it initially cost me about $20. That was 6 years ago. It still works fine. I highly recommend every time that you use it, you wash it out and you store it empty. Soap and water will do. There's also a product called tank cleaner if you want to get fancy and use that. You put the water and the soap inside of it, fill it about halfway, pump it up, spray it out of the nozzle until you're sure that that soap has gone through there quite a bit. Rinse it all out, store it empty. That way there's never a question about what the chemical was that you last put in there. I tend not to use that sprayer except for insects. That way I know I'm not going to accidentally kill a plant by putting some kind of a herbicide in there and then forgetting that it was there and the residue causing problems. What I do for general use, though, when I'm not using that big sprayer in fields or the whole garden, so I use these smaller spray bottles. So you can see I've labeled each one of them so I know what chemical is in there. And that way I don't have to worry about cross-contamination. That works really well. You need some kind of an ounce cup because practically everything is 1 ounce of concentrate, 1 ounce of wilt proof to a gallon of water. You can store the remainder, make sure you mark it well so you don't confuse yourself by grabbing the wrong chemical off the shelf in an unmarked container. But I keep a fungicide handy. I keep a grass selective killer, and I keep a non-selective kills everything sprayer. That's the one you got to be most careful with. You get out there and start spraying something with that, well, your yard's going to look like winter in August. So we've covered pretty much the topic. The only thing that we didn't do is me go out there and show you how to press a button and aim it at a weed. Again, if you get in close to the weed and spray carefully, you will avoid collateral damage around the garden to friendly plants. Using a shield is a good idea if the plant is close. Don't spray on windy days. Best time to spray is first thing in the morning, as early as possible. At night, the plants open the stomates of their leaves. When you spray early in the morning, the plant sucks in that herbicide and thereby dies far more readily than if you do it in the middle of the day. Also, spraying when it's too hot or windy is a good way of damaging a lot more than you expected, even if you're using selective herbicides that are only designed to kill either grass or broadleaf plants. You'll kill both because the potency of that herbicide goes up with the temperature. So that pretty much covers things for today. Next week, we're going to be talking more about how to get your garden through the summer heat and other things. Until then, I hope you have a good garden and everything's going well for you. Don't forget, I have another class starting in August. If you can sign up for that, that would certainly be helpful. You have till the end of July to make up your mind and sign up for it. It's at the same site that the other classes are, and you can look up that address if you don't have it at my own website, which is right here. It has that address listed so you can go there to the class. Good gardening, people.